fellow gods and goddesses, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today we are doing a judge a book by its cover on The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. So literally the moment I'm filming this, I just finished this book like 15 minutes ago. And I decided I want to do a review on it because, one, this is mine and I'm sure a lot of yours most anticipated releases of the year. And, you know, I thought it was going to get views and likes. So that's really why I did it. Like, let's not fool ourselves here. I did it for the views. And you guys are going to stay for the entertainment. This look is probably going to be very similar to my Into the Drowning Deep, as well as my Serpent and Dove review, because as you can tell by the cover, I don't really have much to work with. Like, it's a beautiful cover, but there's only 3 colors in it. Doesn't leave for much creativity. I am definitely just going to pretty much copy my Serpent and Dove makeup look, just do red instead of gold. So if you haven't checked that out and you are in the mood for a rant review, go check that out. I know it's very blurry. I'm really bad at cameras and my camera doesn't have a viewfinder, so it's pretty much me just hoping for the best, and sometimes the best is not what I get. This video is going to have a nicer tone to it than that video. I can promise you that, because I loved this book. I really cannot express the joy I have and the gratitude that I love this book, because I was scared. Again, this is one of my most anticipated releases, and the last few months, the recent reviews of people who have read this book, they weren't all that promising. So I was really nervous. I really was, but I am so happy that this truly did not disappoint. Before I get really deep into my feelings about this book, let me just give a quick synopsis. And hopefully this synopsis will be a little more helpful than just, you know, vampires in New Orleans, because that's really the only synopsis I got, and it's really the only synopsis I needed. Honestly, just the word vampires, that's all I needed. You don't even need to set it in New Orleans. That's just an added bonus. The Beautiful stars our main character, Celine. And Celine, we find out, is fleeing from Paris to New Orleans because she killed somebody. She murdered her attempted rapist, and she takes residence at this convent, which is basically just a place that takes in young immigrant women who usually have like a craft of some sort, and they stay there until they can find proper husbands for them. So Celine is working at this convent with her friend Pippa. Pippa is an immigrant from Yorkshire. They are selling her wares because Celine is this really prestigious fashion designer. A great stereotypical French woman occupation to have. I loved every minute of that. The descriptions of like fashion and all that stuff is so well done. I loved every minute of it. But anyways, we're kind of getting off track. Celine and Pippa are in the market. They're selling Celine's little lace handkerchiefs thingies, and this mysterious and beautiful woman shows up, and she is just admiring Celine's handiwork, and she's like, I'm gonna buy all of them. And she asks her, she's like, do you make dresses? And Celine is like, why indeed I do. Odette, the woman, she hires Celine to make her a dress for this upcoming masquerade ball that is happening. Dad tells her to meet her at Jack's, and Jack's is this very fancy restaurant, and just right above the restaurant is the den of the Court of Lions, and this court has many mysteries that Celine wants to uncover. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, there's kind of a serial killer that's roaming about New Orleans and killing young girls, and we find that those murders eventually make their way to Celine, and she gets caught up in the mysteries of the Court of Lions and these murders. So that is pretty much the synopsis of this book. I loved this book. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and if I wasn't so stingy with my 5 stars, this would absolutely be one. This is truly an upgraded version of 2000's YA paranormal romance. It has all of the same kind of ingredients of a paranormal romance. The main girl with some mysterious past, trouble dealing with herself and her identity, and you have the broody, delicious, mysterious, dark and handsome man. And of course, when you have a notorious bad boy, you have to have a good guy to counteract him. We have the paranormal elements, the beautiful atmosphere. If YA paranormal romance was just written in 2019, this book just shows how much YA has grown in quality since then. My absolute favorite part of this book was the romance. They definitely say I love you basically by the end of the book. You get an insight in watching their relationship grow. It was still in like a month's time, so I know it's inevitable that people won't like it. I don't know, I just feel like they had so much chemistry, and like every single scene in them, their banter was delicious. Like, it was so good. Like, you could just feel the sexual tension, and I loved every minute of it. There's another main character who also has like it's definitely going to be a love triangle, and I cannot believe that Renee Ahdieh is not only bringing vampires back, but she's bringing back a juicy love triangle. And I'm not talking about love triangles where it's like the best friend and the broody guy and you just know that she's never gonna end up with the best friend. I'm looking at you, Cassandra Clare. And it's not like Sarah J Maas where she half-assed the first romance and then, oh, plot twist, she's gonna end up with the bad guy. Like, oh yeah, we didn't see that coming from as soon as the dude came onto the screen. I love both of them so much, and if she is going to do a love triangle properly where you don't know who she's gonna end up with, or even if maybe you do know who she's gonna end up with, there's still that tension. That's what I want when somebody says they're going to write a love triangle. Like, I want the angst. I want to redeem Cassandra Clare. I want Jem and Will. I want that constant falling in love with both of the men in the relationship. That's what I want if you're gonna give me a love triangle, and I think Renee is going to give that to us. So that was definitely my favorite part of the story. But also, just aside from the romance, again, I'm just gonna keep drawing these comparisons, 2010, 2000's YA paranormal, because it's obvious, it's kind of hard to not do that because this is obviously bringing back vampires. It's bringing back that very nostalgic feeling and those nostalgic books that we fell in love with when we were younger. Following that, usually the main character doesn't really have much of a personality. She usually, not always, but usually relies on the man, carry on and save her and give her sense of belonging. You guys know this trope. I don't really need to explain it to you. Celine is such a strong character. She goes through so much growth in this, and she just comes to terms with who she is. To put it in her own words, she really becomes a goddess by the end of the book and takes on so much strength that she's always fronted this strength, and she's always, put up a facade, but she really just comes into it as her own by the end. She's dealing with a lot of guilt. She doesn't regret what she did, but she's still, contemplating, is she evil, like good versus evil, especially because she is, of course, a God-fearing woman. She's just having discussions about, like, can good and evil reside in the same person? Another big discussion that happens in the book is discussions about race. I mean, obviously, you're in a city of New Orleans, which has historically always been a city of very diverse lineage, very diverse ethnicities, and Celine herself is mixed race. She is half Asian and half white, but she has never told anybody about her Asian heritage because her father, basically since her birth, has told her to never tell anybody about her mother for fear of discrimination and losing opportunities and the things that people of color so obviously encounter back then and still today. So we're getting those discussions about how she's always felt like she has ignored a part of herself and a part of her identity, and that has especially become apparent in a city like New Orleans where, again, so much diversity, and specifically of people of mixed race. So she is definitely coming to terms with that, and that is done so well because, of course, this is definitely an own voices. I believe Renee is half Asian herself, and you can tell that she put a lot of herself in Celine. And if you guys are actually curious to see Renee actually talk about this book, check out my latest vlog because I filmed the author signing that I went where she talks a lot about this topic. I actually compared this discussion of a character of who has white passing privilege and who is of mixed race in comparison to everybody's beloved Evelyn Hugo. Because if you guys have read Evelyn Hugo, and I don't want to get too off track, but I just want to draw this comparison, Evelyn is Cuban and she is white passing, and she takes advantage of that in order to excel in Hollywood. But then towards the end of the book, she starts to get mad, like at her maid in particular, who speaks Spanish around her, expecting Evelyn not to understand. Because obviously she doesn't know that she's Cuban because she's been passing as a white woman for all of these years. And you can definitely tell the difference on how Renee talks about this topic of white passing and white privilege and all of those things in comparison to Taylor Jenkins Reid, who is a white woman. It's not necessarily my place to talk on it, but I will say that this is definitely own voices. Celine's grievances about this are truly like kind of heartbreaking when she talks about them, and you really can feel for her as she's coming to terms with this privilege and just reshaping her whole identity and trusting people with her identity, etc, etc, etc. And I thought it was a really great discussion to have, especially when this is a historical fiction fantasy set in one of the most diverse cities in America. I also really loved Renee's writing. I have never read any of her books before. I have Wrath in the Dawn on my shelves, but I have not gotten to it yet. But this definitely made me more excited to read it because her writing is definitely flowery. It's flowery in a way that is very accessible and you still understand what she's saying, but she's saying it in a very beautiful way. I don't know how many times I've used that pun before. I feel like this look is really boring. I can find some silver in here. This book is also split up into two perspectives. So we have third person, and then we get perspectives of the serial killer in first person. Those chapters were my absolute favorite. They honestly kind of sent chills up my body. Like, they were so well crafted. This book is just really interesting because a lot of times when you're around the characters, you're just in awe of the atmosphere of New Orleans and this beautiful city with this amazing food, which, oh my god, the descriptions of the food, I was drooling. And then you get to like the murder scenes, or you get to these chapters featuring the murderer, and then you're just sucked back into, oh shit, this is going down. You're just reminded of the stakes in the book. Although I absolutely loved this book and I really don't have any problems with it, I do just want to, caution people because I definitely don't think this book is necessarily for everybody. Oh, that's pretty. Ooh, that silver is really intense. I love that. I hate to use the word slow because I think slow has just a very negative connotation to it. And I know when people say a book is slow, it doesn't bother me because I know what they mean by slow and I like that, or I don't mind it. So I want to be very specific when I say the book is slow. The book is very much character driven. It's very suspenseful in a sense where things are coming and things are going to happen. They don't necessarily happen on the first page or even like the first 100 pages. It's about the journey, not the destination, because this book is very much a setup for the rest of the story. I don't know how many books are going to be in this story, but you can definitely tell that this book it's a setup. It's like laying down the foundation. It's about drawing you in and keeping you interested and keeping you intrigued for the rest of the story. And I, myself, am very intrigued. The author gives you breadcrumbs throughout the entire story where she reminds you, oh, remember this is happening. And it also helps that I loved Celine as a character and I loved the romance. I loved Celine, I loved Bastian, I loved Pippa, I loved Odette, I loved Michael, I loved everybody in here. So if you don't find attachments to the characters, which I honestly doubt anybody would do because Renee is so good at making you invested in the story, like these characters are just great. So that's what really keeps you invested. I also think it is a very interesting way she went about this because let's be real, we all know about vampires, right? We all know about these classic overdone. I mean, the whole reason they've been gone is because they've been oversaturated on the market. So we all are aware of basic lore surrounding vampires. I'm not saying Renee is going to do a textbook definition of vampires. I'm not saying she's not going to make it her own and make it unique. But regardless, we all know the foundations of vampires. So I think Renee really heavily relied on how we already kind of know what vampires are. So she didn't need to spell out who these creatures were. She didn't need to put the word vampire until, I don't know, like page 50. Like she didn't need to put vampire on the first page because we know, not only just from the synopsis, of course, we knew this was about vampires, but we just know the characteristics of them. We know when to see a character and see their behavior. And I think that was such a great way that Renee just like put those little crumbs in there without really saying the word outright. I think that was just a genius way because we all just knew it was coming and then it came and we were just like, yes. And it's not to say that things weren't answered. In this book, we find out who the killer is. We find out more about the Court of Lions. We get more about her personal lore about vampires. But I'm not going to lie to you guys. We don't get a ton. We don't get a whole lot. She kind of name drops things and we definitely get more of a feel by the end, but we don't know a whole lot. But we know enough to keep us invested and we know enough to keep us intrigued. If you're gonna write a series, and this is coming from a person who prefers standalone fantasies, which if you haven't seen my top 5 standalone fantasies, go check that out. If you're going to write a series, I want it to be slow. So I remain invested in the story. I mean, not too slow where I'm like, nothing's happening and I'm just bored throughout the whole thing. But I don't want to learn everything in the first book because if I know everything in the first book, then going into the second book, I have no stake in this. I have no interest because you gave me all I needed to know in the first book and you could have just been done with it, but now you're dragging out the plot. But I feel like the market is so saturated with books like that, where you just get all of the answers and then the second book is boring and then it ends in a cliffhanger and then it's the third book and then things get interesting again. And I don't think this is going to do that. I think The Damned, which is the sequel to this, may be one of those few books that don't have second book syndrome, because she has pretty much kept us out of the loop on what's going on in the nitty-gritty of it. Like I said, I don't want to make it sound like we don't know what's happening and we don't know what's going on. It's just we don't have all of the answers yet. And I feel like people are going to be disappointed with that. I feel like people are going to be very confused with the story. I feel like they may not really enjoy it that much, and they think it's too slow, and they think there wasn't enough vampires in it, even though there were plenty of vampires in it. I promise you, it could be considered slow, and I'm not saying it's not slow, but I like slow books, I think, at least in a series. So I think those are going to be some big criticisms that people have. I think people are not going to like the love triangle because it's such a hated trope. But like I said, it's such a well done one, at least from what I've seen so far. I am so very much invested. I was squealing so hard reading this entire book. It was just such a good time. Anyways, I'm rambling on, but I am going to go off camera, do my lashes, liner, lips, and I will be right back. Alright, you guys, so here is the final look. Let me see it in comparison to the book. So I got the silver in there, I got the red, obviously the black. I did a little ombre combination for the lips to make them lusciously blood red. And even though this is, it's not the most complex look that I've ever done, but I certainly think it came out pretty well. And I think it matches the overall theme of the book. So before I bid you adieu, let me just wrap up like a few bullet points from this review. So absolutely standout was the writing and the romance and the characters. Honestly, I loved the main characters, loved the main romance, loved the writing so much. I think it was super atmospheric, and which is kind of necessary when you have such a luxurious setting that is New Orleans. The plot is definitely slow moving. It's definitely a piece that I believe will be an overall masterpiece by the end. And I definitely think if you really love atmospheric writing, if you love historical fiction fantasy, if you really love the diviners, I feel like this has very similar kind of feels to that. And if you love vampires, this is a perfect book for you. This book gives all of the core elements of a 2000s YA paranormal romance, but done in context of 2019 with all of these great books that we have available to us now. She's just elevated that genre, I feel like, to the 2019 market in such a well done way. I think people are going to be disappointed because that's inevitable with really highly anticipated releases, but for me, this book did not disappoint, and I'm so glad it did, especially since the last book I read was another highly anticipated release, and it just failed completely for me. So Renee really just redeemed my taste in anticipated releases, and I'm so happy for it. I definitely need to check out The Wrath of the Dawn for sure, because loved her writing so much. I feel like I've said all that I need to say, so definitely let me know down below if you have read this, if you are reading this, if you want to read it, or if you didn't end up liking this, if you did read it, let me know. Let's have a conversation. Other than that, that is going to be it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!